Hey everyone, it's Professor Clark, and in this lecture, we are getting introduced to a new case. We are going to learn a little bit about the genitive case today. So you might be asking yourself, what is the genitive case? The genitive case roughly conveys the equivalent to what we mean when we say of in English. And it's sort of a little bit broader than that, but a lot of times it has this kind of meaning. It's the genitive because it indicates the genesis of something, where something comes from or what it is made of. You have already seen the genitive case used with the preposition u to indicate possession. So there are a number of prepositions that take the genitive, one of which is u, and it is also used to indicate possession. So here we have both of those together. We also use it to indicate quantity, which we will talk about in a bit, and to indicate negation. So it indicates the genesis of something, but it also indicates the lack of something, or when we say that something is not there. Here on slide 3, we have a chart of the genitive form of personal pronouns, and there's also a chart of them in your textbook. And so the ya form goes to minya, which you've already seen with u minya. Ты goes to тебя. And then in the third person is where things get a little bit complicated. Both он and оно become его, unless there is a preposition, like u, for example, in which case they become него. The third person pronouns always begin with n when they are preceded by a preposition. So many of the cases will have two forms for the third person pronouns. The form for use without a preposition, like его, and then a form that begins with n for use with a preposition, like у него. The prepositional case only has the one form because it is always used with a preposition, but all the other cases have two forms because they could be used with and without prepositions. So moving on, она becomes ее or у нее. Кто becomes кого. Obviously, it doesn't have an N because it already has a ka. And then moving into the plural, мы becomes нас, вы becomes вас, and then они, we're back in the third person, and we have the two forms, ich for using without a preposition, and них for using with a preposition. Now let's talk about the genitive singular of nouns, and we are only going to talk about the genitive singular in this lecture. The genitive plural is going to come later because the genitive plural is very challenging, and so we're going to devote a whole big section to it later in the semester. But right now, we're just going to do the genitive singular, which is pretty straightforward. So as usual, masculine and neuter collapse into the same endings. They do this for any oblique case, any case other than the nominative and the accusative. For all the other cases, masculine and neuter have the same ending. So for hard stem, for masculine and neuter in the genitive singular, we're going to add a. And if there is already a vowel there, like o, we will drop that and add the a. So magazine, a store, becomes magazina. Окно, a window, becomes окна. And then for soft stem, we are going to add ya, which makes sense because ya is the soft version of a. So герой, a hero, becomes героя. And notice how we drop the и краткое when we're writing it and then add the ya. Словарь, dictionary, becomes словаря. And once again, as we always do, we are going to drop the мягкий знак and then add our ending. So we drop that мягкий знак and we add ya, словаря. Занятие, a college class, becomes занятия. And again, we drop that я and we add ya. Занятие becomes занятия. Now moving on to feminine, and feminine is a little more complicated because the 7-letter spelling rule is going to come into effect. There are a number of velar stem and husher stem nouns where we are going to have to consider the 7-letter spelling rule. So with hard stem, if there's no spelling rule in effect, the a is going to become uy. So mama, mom, becomes mami. Sistra, sister, becomes sistri. But if you have a velar stem noun, so one where the last consonant in the noun is g, k, or h, or a husher stem noun, one where the last consonant in the noun is j, ch, sh, or sh, we are going to add e rather than uy, because we cannot write uy after velars and hushers. So kniga becomes knigi. Sabaka, a dog, becomes sabaki. And then moving on to soft stem, we are going to add the soft e. So if we have a ya, we will drop the ya and add e. Nedelia, a week, becomes nedeli. Italia, Italy, becomes Italii. Plощads, a city square, becomes ploshidi. And notice how we drop that mjaki and we add e. There are a couple of nouns that end in mjaki that we have to watch out for, and those are mat, mother, and Deutsch, daughter. And they have a suffix yer that gets added anytime we add an ending. So mat becomes materi, and Deutsch becomes deutscheri in the genitive singular. Now let's talk about the genitive singular of adjectives. And as always, adjectives look a little scary because there are a number of endings, but in fact, there are not a number of endings. It just looks like there are, but in fact, most of them are the same. And they're very regular and predictable. So let's start with hard stem and velar stem. In the genitive singular, hard stem and velar stem are going to be in the same group. They are going to have the same endings. And masculine and neuter are going to have the same ending. So adjectives modifying masculine nouns will have the same endings in the genitive singular as adjectives modifying neuter nouns. And that ending is ova. Notice that it is written or, but we say ova. This is just a funky thing that happens. For genitive singular endings, we write or ye ge or, but we pronounce that g as a v. So novi, new, becomes novava. Ruski, Russian, becomes ruskava. And we write, again, oga, but we say ova. For soft stem nouns, it's the same, but with a ye. So the ending is yeva. So sinyi, dark blue, becomes sinyeva. Posledny, last, becomes poslednyeva. Husher stems are the same. So for most husher stems, the 5-letter spelling rule is going to be in effect, and we are going to write ye-go, but pronounce yeva. So хороший, good, becomes хорошего. However, we must always keep our eye on the adjective большой because it's unusual in being a husher stem adjective with an N stress. And because it is N stressed, the 5-letter spelling rule is not in effect, and we are going to write oga and say ova. So большой becomes большова. Feminine is a little simpler because what you write is what you say. Hard stem and velar stem are going to be oi. So novaya becomes novai, ruskaya becomes ruskoy. Soft stem is going to become ye, so sinyaya becomes sinyi, poslednyaya becomes poslednyay. And then husher stem, as long as it's stem stressed, we're going to write ye, so хорошая becomes хорошей. But when it is N stressed, as in большая, we're going to write oi, so большая, большой. Finally, let's look at the genitive singular of special modifiers. They are going to have the same endings basically as adjectives, so it'll be either ova or yeva for masculine and neuter, and oi or ye for feminine. But it's a little bit unexpected what happens, or they have like their own quirks that you have to pay attention to. So if we look at this chart here on slide 6, and there's also a useful chart in your textbook. If we look at chi, notice that before we add our soft endings, because chi is always going to take soft endings, this mjaki znak pops in. So masculine and neuter is chiavo, and it's end stressed, but we write a mjaki znak between the ch and the ending. The same for feminine, it's chi, but we write this mjaki znak between the ch and the ye ending. Moi becomes mayavo and maye, and notice how the stress goes on to the very last syllable in the word. These special modifiers are unusual in that way, in having the stress go on to the very last syllable of the ending sometimes. The same thing happens with tvoi, so tvayavo, tvaye. But nash and vash are just regular old stem stress. Nashava, nashe, vashava, vashe. Atet is also regular old stem stress, atava and atle. But adin has this stress on the very ending, adnavo, adnoi. And so there you have an introduction to genitive endings. That may seem like a lot, but they are pretty straightforward and predictable, so you should get a handle on them pretty quickly.